The United States spent $296 billion on defense in World War II, which is approximately $5.2 trillion in 2024 money. This represented 35.8% of the country's gross domestic product, a dramatic increase from the 1.4% of the GDP spent on defense in 1940, or the 2.7% of the GDP projected to be spent in 2024. Not all this money was used by the U.S. For its defense. Allies and partners received about $50 billion, or 17%, through the Lend-Lease program. The Lend-Lease Act, passed on March 11, 1941, formalized the system for the U.S. government to lend or lease material and or supplies to its allies to allow them to continue to fight against the Allied powers in World War II. This included financial and material aid like weapons, ships, aircraft, vehicles, food, and medicine. More than 40 countries received Lend-Lease aid. But the United States needed things too. The U.S. needed bases, including airfields and ports, to support movement of troops and sustainment of our operations around the world. The U.S. also needed natural resources to support our manufacturing effort, things like rubber and oil. The U.S. also needed support for our forward deployed troops, like access to medical care, food, and ammunition that would be a lot more expensive to ship from the United States. So in the Lend-Lease Act, there was an authority allowed for countries to repay their support from us, called reverse Lend-Lease, where nations could give us things like access to property or land or ports or airfields or access to natural resources to help pay off their debt. U.S. diplomats, mostly from the State Department, negotiated with our partner countries to determine our needs and those countries' needs to determine what we would give them for Lend-Lease and what they would give us back in reverse Lend-Lease. By the end of the war, about $8 billion, or 16%, of Lend-Lease was repaid through reverse Lend-Lease. While most people familiar with World War II are knowledgeable about Lend-Lease, there is not much specific information, especially secondary sources, about reverse Lend-Lease. And what is available is mostly financial statistics. It doesn't really go into information about how the U.S. was actually provided support. Part of this is just reverse Lend-Lease doesn't have a lot written about it, but parts because there are multiple terms. Even though the legal term was reverse Lend-Lease, there are other terms that have been used in those documents, including reciprocal aid or mutual aid, that helps lose focus on reverse Lend-Lease. But it's time to highlight reverse Lend-Lease, and that's what I want to do in my dissertation. I don't want to focus on the economic aspects, more on the diplomatic and military aspects of reverse Lend-Lease. So what was it? My dissertation, will answer these questions and others that are related, like what countries received Lend-Lease and how do those countries repay us through reverse Lend-Lease? What were the different programs that were negotiated? Did we initiate some programs and ask countries to give us stuff and we gave them Lend-Lease in return? Or was it always the country coming to us for aid and we asked then for reverse Lend-Lease items that we need? And then what I want to look at is what was the impact of reverse Lend-Lease after the war? What relationships were built during World War II, diplomatically and militarily, that were sustained later on? Like, did we keep bases in locations where we normally wouldn't have them because we used them during World War II? So I want to look at I will have to use quantitative research in part because of the economic piece of it, but I really want to focus on qualitative historical research on the U.S. diplomatic and military history sides of it. And I have found quite a bit of archival primary sources. Most of the primary sources are U.S. government documents, reports, and studies that were published by both executive and legislative branches during and soon after the war. Most of the non-government primary sources are contemporary newspaper and journal articles. From a perspective related to the secondary sources, to highlight some of the historiography, I started off looking at the official U.S. military histories of World War II. And right now, for this time period, I'm going to focus on the U.S. Army. The Center of Military History published we call it the Green Books. It's a 78-book series on World War II. And of those books, they started the effort in 1946. The last book was published in the 1990s. And over that time, many of these books have been updated. Of those 78 books, I only found so far about 10 of the books that talk about Lend-Lease or mutual aid. And of those, there's very little emphasis on reverse Lend-Lease. I think I found only 9 that mentioned reverse Lend-Lease. So I am surprised that there's not more effort on reverse Lend-Lease in the Green Book series, in part because the U.S. Army had the responsibility to deliver Lend-Lease aid. So having access to bases around the world and getting that chain of bases and ports would be really significant to deliver the Lend-Lease aid that we promised to our allies. So when it came to dissertations and master's thesis papers, I didn't find any that focused on reverse Lend-Lease. I did find quite a few that talked about Lend-Lease, and of them, many of them mention reverse Lend-Lease, but not in any significant level of detail. And one example was, I looked at a few of them so far. I found a 1965 one where reverse Lend-Lease was mentioned 42 times, but it really wasn't introduced until most of the way through the dissertation and not in a lot of detail. So my focus on my dissertation is going to be reverse Lend-Lease and looking at how the $8 billion was repaid and how those partnerships have assisted the U.S. diplomatically and military ever since.